Panel, the ATAR is a rat race that benefits the fattest rat.
I think it's problematic for 1A to come up here and tell you that the ATAR favours the rich.
All of a sudden, these vulnerable year 12s have so much more on their plate.
Why then should you go and turn away a person who did the hard work, regardless of whether they went to a private school or not?
In terms of announcing the result debate, this was unfortunately or fortunately a split decision.
Welcome to the National Schools Debating Championships. It's Australia's most prestigious high school debating competition, and these students are competing to be the top high school debating team in the country.
Life after university is going to go on.
Having an argument in itself is really quite fun. And down the bench you can just destroy your opposition if you've got a really coherent team case, so that's pretty fun.
Why do we see the exact same problem where kids from lower SES schools in the USA also fail to get into higher elite schools?
But they don't, right? Plenty of people that go to Harvard are low ACS. It's one of the key metrics they use.
The championships have been going since 1971. They rotate between states and territories, and this year it's in Adelaide.
Panel, what you need to realise is that all year 12s are vulnerable. You should weigh their mental health very highly in this debate.
So it's been a very intense week. This is our 5th debate so far, but I think it's gone well.
And at the end of the comp, 5 lucky debaters will represent Australia at the World Schools Debating Championships.
A lot of the topics that we do get to do are like things that are either relevant to us now or might be in the future.
They never prove that the most...
So what's debating all about?
The affirmative side is South Australia and the negative is Western Australia.
In each debate, 2 opposing teams argue about a topic. The team arguing for the topic is called the affirmative, and the team arguing against is called the negative. And the team that's judged to make the best argument wins.
Personally, I think I like being the negative because you get to just poke holes in opposition arguments and you get to try and tear their case down through rebuttal, and that's kind of very rewarding in a sense.
Are they insinuating that all public school students are just lazy students?
Debating has a long history, from the philosophical debates of ancient Greece to the rise of debating societies during the Age of Enlightenment, all which have played a huge role in shaping modern styles of debating.
Excuse me, I think we're getting more questions between the two.
But if you think debating is just saying a bunch of stuff and winging it, think again.
Having an understanding of the topic, we had one on that we would abolish the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, if you didn't know what the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was, it's going to be very hard to argue.
Before the showdown begins, teams are given a bit of time to prepare. And when I say a bit, they find out the debate topic 1 hour before the debate begins and have to come up with a game plan in that time.
It's very a high-pressure environment because you only have an hour to prepare, and then you've got to get up and speak in front of an audience who are judging you and taking notes on what you're saying. So, just a bit of humour or something in the prep room, so that everyone's de-stresses, because it helps, I think.
I think there are 2 important questions in this debate.
After the debate topic is selected, teams are taken to separate rooms, and no one's allowed in.
So there's no coaches, no staff, no parents, no students, no one. It's just a locked door, 4 people inside with their brains and maybe a dictionary if they want one.
Lucky for us, these reserve debaters are going to show us what happens behind the scenes.
I was trying so desperately to keep a straight face.
The only things teams are given to prepare are the topic, some pens and some paper. And using mobile phones or any other electronic communication devices is a big no-no. One of the first things teams do is brainstorm.
So the first 5 minutes is always a silent brainstorm where people just put pens to paper by themselves, no one interjects, no one talks. That's just to allow everyone to bring out their own ideas and not be influenced or biased by the people. Who are smokers and what are their incentives?
Then it's time to define and interpret the topic. The definition consists of defining individual or keywords of the topic. The interpretation is what we understand the words to mean in the context of the topic. For example, in the argument that smoking in public places should be banned, we need to understand what smoking, public places, should be and banned actually mean. And in the context of the argument, we can be pretty sure it's referring to smoking tobacco, not smoking food.
So firstly with the word should, we would look at what actually are we going to do tangibly? Are we going to fine? What sort of punishments are we going to put in place to reinforce this? And then next we'd look at why specifically public places, what unique benefit or what unique opportunity do smokers have in that spot. Then we'd look at why do smokers smoke, what are their incentives, and then we would bring all of that together and go, under our model, with the changes we're implementing in public land, do we think that smokers will change or not? Do we think that these benefits that we think will happen actually happen?
So these things just characterize and sets the scope for all of us so that we'll be on the same page, so that we are able to create substantive arguments out of that discussion.
And with 3 members per team, each are given a special role. The first speaker, the second speaker, and the third speaker.
Our role allocation actually starts during training. Our coaches will actually choose the speakers in that who's going to be first, second, and third based on what they think they will be able to perform well in.
The first affirmative opens the debate. They've got the advantage of setting the tone and are responsible for defining the topic, providing a model, which is the policy they plan to implement to support their case and how they would do so, outlining the team split, and presenting their side's arguments. The first negative's job is kind of the same, but their extra tasks are agreeing or disagreeing with the affirmative's definition, providing a counter model which aims to prove their model is a better solution, and rebutting arguments made by the first affirmative. Next up is the second affirmative. They're responsible for rebutting the first negative's points, as well as stating their own arguments. The second negative does the same, but they rebut arguments made by the affirmative team, with a focus on the second affirmative's arguments. Then the third affirmative and negative wrap up the show. They're not supposed to introduce any new material. Instead, they rebut all the arguments raised by their opposition, defend any attacks made against their own team, and give the team's final stance on the issue.
A rebuttal is very interesting, when you've got to think very strategically about what is the best thing to say in response to the opposition, because you have to be able to say that their point doesn't stand and that yours weigh more heavily and have more impacts than them, to be able to prove that you claim more benefits.
With all that in mind, team members start developing a case. And this means deciding on what points they want to cover and have a rough run-through of what they're going to say.
Well, I think the paper and the cue cards help a lot. These discussions that you have in the prep room also help, because as long as you have an understanding of the points you're making and the concepts, if you forget, to say a particular line, you can still articulate and explain what you're trying to say and what, the meaning you're trying to convey in that is.
Once prep time's up, it's showtime.
I now declare this debate open and call upon the first speaker of the affirmative team, Jack.
The person who helps run the show is the chairperson.
As chairperson, I make sure that people come up at the right time and obey the rules of debating, and that the audience is aware of who is currently speaking. I'm a rotating first speaker, which means that in certain debates I will speak first, and in other debates my teammate will speak first. It depends on what kind of matter knowledge or generalised understanding we have of the debate. But whoever isn't speaking, basically the extras or the leftovers, they're who are eventually going to become the timekeeper or the chairperson, because they're kind of in the wings for the debate.
There's also a timekeeper who, keeps the time.
I'm the fourth speaker for WA today. Because I'm on the negative side, I become the timekeeper for the debate. As my role is just to time people and make sure that people know when they can ask POIs, which are questions that you can ask to interrupt the other team.
Before I get into my impacting of this point, sure.
These could still come across as...
And that can happen between the 2nd minute and the 7th minute of a speech. So I ring bells to let people know when that is open and shut. And then I ring 2 bells at the end of the allotted 8 minutes. And then if they go 30 seconds over, I just ring repeatedly to let them know that their time's up and they need to finish their speech.
But there was a reason why a bell wasn't used today.
Oh, we just had a broken bell today, but that's, we'd usually use a bell, but clapping works as well.
And these are the people the teams are out to impress, the adjudicators.
I'm adjudicating, so I listen to both teams speak, hear their arguments, and then I decide which team was the winner.
We score each team by looking at their manner, their matter, and their method. And so manner and matter are weighted equally, and method is worth half of that. And it's just about what you say, how well you say it, and also how good the structure of your speech is.
I think one of the things that really sets teams that win, apart from teams that lose, is whether or not they've really listened to what the other team has said and taken it at its best, really given it the credit it deserves before they respond to it.
This is huge because in an education system that is meant to be equitable, it has oppressed for years the most disadvantaged students.
I'm going to tell you why the ATAR is the most equal system to allocate university admissions. And I'm going to
So how do these guys make it look so easy?
You always take a breather before your introduction. You know, you try to pace yourself a little bit more, because I remember I used to be very aggressive when I debated, and it took away a lot of the persuasion that you're actually trying to communicate. So that's a skill, as well as just the stuff you're saying, but how you're saying it as well.
If you're only selecting kids based on who got the best grade, you're still turning people away. Firstly, that's not very comparative, but the second thing I'd like to point out is there's probably a lot of people who would have made like very good doctors but just didn't make it because of the ATAR cut.
Admissions are still very taxing. Why is that important? I think the stress comes from the fact that these kids are really pressured to get into universities, and I think their system, where they overcomplicate this, makes this far worse.
Often at state level, people use cue cards, but at nationals, we often use paper. And I personally find papers a lot easier because you can like read off, and it's also, you can like lay it out in specific order across the bench.
Dot points, I think, are really good because you don't need to sort of have your whole speech written out to sort of speak once you sort of get into it. If you look down and have a dot point, the same way you can have a conversation with someone without a piece of paper in front of you, you know what to say when you read it. So I think it's using the dot points and then looking up and engaging with the room is a far more effective way of sort of communicating your arguments, and it generally helps you win debates.
There's plenty of doctors who get 94 or 93 and still slip through the cracks, and they would have made better doctors because they were the ones that looked after their sick mother at home and they'd shown that compassion and empathy before. Those are the people you miss out on side negative.
Because there are hard-working kids who are fighting for those incredibly prestigious spots, and I think just chucking a disadvantaged kid in because like they had a dying mum is substantially less fair than the kid who did work really hard.
After the third speakers, a speaker from each team has 4 minutes to wrap up their team's arguments and to convince the adjudicators why they should win.
Because even if it did favour, to an extent, rich students, it was comparatively less than subjective things like extracurriculars. Everyone is going to be affected by this system because everyone wants to get into these top universities, opposed to the small minority they may or may not get in on the first issue. That is why this was clearly an opposition victory.
I think at the end of the day, panel, you should consider that ambiguity around your co-curriculars, even if that stands, is probably worse than knowing that because you went to a public school, because you were born into your family, you could never succeed in your ATAR, because your public school had never gotten anyone above a 99 ATAR. I would always take ambiguity over systemic oppression, panel. It's up to you two to decide. Thank you.
After that, the adjudicators tally their scores to determine the winner.
So the topic was about whether universities should consider non-quantitative measures like ATAR and instead should consider quantitative things like essays, interviews, community service, things like that. We were on the affirmative, so we said that, yeah, things like essays and community service should be incredibly important to going to university and getting into those courses.
Our argument was essentially that ATAR was a more equal playing field that lower socioeconomic students could succeed on because it was just more equal than sort of more subjective measures of measuring merit.
It's like, yeah, the waiting period, you never know what the judges are going to say.
I now invite Ali to announce the result.
In terms of announcing the result debate, this was unfortunately or fortunately a split decision. So with a 2-1 majority, we awarded this debate to the negative team, WA.
Today we had a split win, so we didn't pull all 3 adges, so all of those end up tallying up. So whichever 4 teams pull the most adges out of their 7 round robins, they'll break and move forwards.
Debating is just sort of a really good general skill to help with your critical thinking, your articulation, sort of even teamwork and communication.
Don't be afraid to mess up, because if you mess up, like, no one really cares. I've said some pretty dumb stuff in some of my speeches, but you just move on and say something that actually makes sense afterwards.
But if you just start doing it, you start getting up there speaking, you start to build that confidence, you start to just understand more about like how arguments work, how the world works, and really just the first step is just trying out debating.
I also like how much you learn from it, because you learn so many things about different topics that you might not otherwise have ever heard of or known. And I think that contributes to your general understanding of the world. And I think it's very interesting, to learn about the world we live in, and it's a very effective way to do that is through debating.